The woman standing behind Meghan Markle in Geneva was never there for Meghan, and that single detail may have just exposed the entire illusion the Sussex household has been desperately trying to protect for years. Because according to a forensic breakdown of the footage, the only visible figure standing behind Meghan during her so-called major global speech was not a supporter, not a royal watcher, not even a curious listener. She was a tired commuter waiting for a bus. A bus! And suddenly the entire glamorous international appearance collapsed into something much darker, far more embarrassing, and brutally revealing. What makes this situation explosive is not just the empty streets of Geneva, it's the panic surrounding them. The Sussex media machine allegedly tried to frame random tourists and pedestrians as audience members to create the illusion of public excitement. But the streets told a different story. Cars kept moving, people kept walking, nobody stopped, nobody gathered, nobody cared. Meghan Markle stood in front of one of the most powerful international institutions on earth, and the atmosphere looked colder than a corporate fire drill. That silence became deafening, because this was supposed to be proof that Meghan still had royal-level star power after years of claiming the monarchy feared her popularity. But Geneva became something else entirely, a public stress test, and according to critics, she failed it spectacularly. That is where the comparison to Princess Catherine suddenly turned vicious. Only days earlier, Catherine reportedly appeared in Italy for an early learning engagement, and crowds allegedly traveled hours just to see her. Huge energy, packed reactions, emotional excitement. Then came Meghan's Geneva speech, with empty sidewalks and one confused woman waiting for public transport. No wonder critics immediately called it the most humiliating contrast of Meghan's post-royal career. The visual comparison alone became devastating. Catherine appearing like the future queen adored by the public, Meghan appearing isolated in a giant open space where even tourists seemed more interested in taking pictures of a sculpture nearby than listening to her speech. And once that comparison exploded online, the mood shifted completely. Suddenly, people weren't debating Meghan's message anymore. They were questioning whether the celebrity machine surrounding her had finally collapsed. But the deeper controversy started hours before the speech even began. Because instead of arriving with quiet professionalism, Meghan posted what critics called the mama's little helper mirror selfie. And that image triggered absolute chaos online. Why? Because right there inside the frame, hidden among designer clothing and luxury displays, sat Princess Lilibet positioned near Meghan, while expensive outfits and accessories were prominently visible like a luxury showroom. Critics immediately accused Meghan of turning a family moment into a merchandising campaign. And the timing looked catastrophic, because Meghan was literally preparing to give a speech about protecting children from online harm while simultaneously using her own child in a carefully framed social media post designed to drive engagement. The contradiction was so obvious that even commentators usually sympathetic to Meghan reportedly struggled to defend it. Then came the detail that made people stare even harder: the walk-in closet, the endless rows of luxury clothing, the visible designer labels. Commentators estimated that hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fashion appeared inside one single frame. And suddenly, Meghan's Geneva trip stopped looking like humanitarian advocacy and started looking like a luxury influencer campaign wearing the mask of global activism. Critics said the image felt tone-deaf beyond belief, especially during a speech supposedly focused on vulnerable children and digital exploitation. But Meghan allegedly posted it anyway. That's what made the backlash feel so brutal. People began asking whether anyone around her was still capable of saying no, because according to insiders and commentators, Meghan and Harry have allegedly developed a reputation for ignoring professional advice completely, choosing emotional instinct and image obsession over strategic thinking. Geneva may have been the moment that reputation became impossible to hide anymore. And then another uncomfortable pattern emerged: Archie's absence. Observers noticed that while Lilibet continues appearing in carefully controlled content, Archie has become increasingly invisible. Some commentators suggested that as he grows older, he may be resisting public exposure, while Lilibet, still too young to fully understand the consequences, remains easier to feature in content. That speculation ignited another ethical firestorm because Meghan's speech itself centered around online safety for children. Critics immediately asked the obvious question: if social media exposure is dangerous for children, why keep placing your own children inside promotional content connected to branding, publicity, and engagement metrics? The contradiction became impossible to ignore. The message and the behavior no longer matched, and audiences noticed instantly. Then came the whispers about how Meghan allegedly even secured the Geneva platform in the first place. According to explosive commentary surrounding the event, critics claim the Sussex operation now relies heavily on pay-to-play appearances, where agencies allegedly help secure speaking opportunities through financial arrangements rather than genuine demand. If true, that completely changes the meaning of the Geneva speech, because suddenly the empty streets become even more humiliating. Imagine paying for access to a global stage and still failing to attract attention. That is the nightmare scenario critics now say Meghan walked directly into. And once those accusations spread online, the event transformed from an advocacy speech into something far more dangerous for the Sussex brand. Evidence of decline. What terrified observers most was the growing sense that Meghan may still believe the public obsession from 2018 exists unchanged today. But culture moves brutally fast. New celebrities emerge. Attention shifts. Audiences evolve. Critics argue that Meghan's team continues presenting her like an A-list global phenomenon, while the actual public response now tells a very different story. And Geneva exposed that gap in the harshest possible way. Because if genuine global star power still existed, the streets would not have looked empty. The internet would not have focused more on a child-centered Instagram post than the speech itself. And major American media outlets would not have ignored the policy message in favor of celebrity gossip surrounding Princess Lilibet. The symbolism became impossible to escape. The collapse became even more obvious once major media outlets started reacting in ways the Sussex household probably never expected. Because despite all the effort poured into framing the Geneva appearance as a serious international policy moment, many mainstream outlets barely cared about the speech itself. That was the devastating part. The World Health Organization backdrop, the dramatic stage lighting, the carefully rehearsed lines about protecting children online, none of it generated the excitement Meghan's team likely hoped for. Instead, coverage focused almost entirely on the Instagram mirror selfie with Lilibet. That single image overshadowed the entire event within hours. Think about how humiliating that really is. Meghan stood at a global institution attempting to present herself as a powerful international advocate, and the internet only wanted to talk about her closet, her designer clothes, and the child positioned inside the frame. The speech disappeared behind the spectacle, and critics argued that this revealed the true problem haunting the Sussex brand right now. Audiences no longer believe the substance. They only react to the drama surrounding it. What made the Geneva situation even more uncomfortable was the growing accusation that Meghan's humanitarian appearances now resemble cosplay activism more than real advocacy. That phrase spread aggressively online after commentators pointed out how perfectly staged everything looked while simultaneously feeling emotionally hollow. Meghan arriving in luxury fashion. Meghan photographed with carefully selected angles. Meghan delivering emotional warnings about online dangers immediately after posting highly strategic child-centered content herself. The contradictions stacked on top of each other so fast that the entire event began looking less like a humanitarian mission and more like a celebrity rebranding exercise struggling to survive. Critics argue that if Meghan genuinely wanted to prove her commitment to children's digital safety, the first thing she would do is stop using her own children as engagement bait online. But instead, according to commentators, the household appears to be leaning into family-centered content harder than ever because it's one of the few things still generating mainstream media attention. Then came the most brutal comparison of all. Commentators began asking a terrifying hypothetical question. What would happen if a true A-list celebrity suddenly appeared at that same Geneva location? The answer was immediate. Chaos. Crowds. Thousands of screaming fans within minutes. Names like Justin Bieber, Katy Perry, and Charlie XCX were thrown around as examples of what genuine celebrity pull actually looks like in 2026. And that comparison exposed something deeply uncomfortable for the Sussex operation. Meghan's team allegedly continues framing her like a globally magnetic cultural force, but the Geneva reality suggested otherwise. The empty streets became a public measurement of relevance, and critics claimed the results were catastrophic because, according to the footage, even with advanced publicity and global media buildup, almost nobody showed up. The silence around her became symbolic, a brutal visual representation of fading influence. But underneath all of this was an even darker conversation quietly unfolding online. The idea that Meghan and Harry may have exhausted the royal connection that originally fueled fueled their commercial power. One quote kept resurfacing again and again: Prince Philip's famous observation that the crown is the star, not the individual, the institution. Critics argued Geneva proved exactly what Philip meant. Once the royal machinery disappeared, once the palace aura faded, once the institutional protection weakened, the audience attention started evaporating too. That realization terrified people watching this unfold because it suggested something much bigger than one failed speech. It suggested the Sussex brand itself may have been built on borrowed institutional prestige that cannot be recreated independently forever. And Geneva allegedly exposed how thin that independent celebrity layer has now become. The financial implications of this conversation made the entire situation even more explosive. Analysts and commentators started openly discussing the Sussex household's burn rate, questioning how sustainable their current lifestyle and media strategy really are if public interest continues shrinking. According to critics, every failed appearance, every mocked campaign, every awkward publicity stunt slowly pushes the household into a more desperate cycle where bigger controversies are needed just to maintain visibility. That is why some observers believe the shift toward child-focused content has intensified, because outrage still creates engagement, curiosity still creates clicks, and attention, even negative attention, may now be the only remaining fuel keeping the Sussex media machine operational. The problem is that audiences are becoming increasingly aware of the mechanism itself. People no longer simply consume the spectacle. They dissect it. They analyze it. They question every motive hiding behind every post. And once audiences begin viewing your public image as strategic manipulation instead of authenticity, rebuilding trust becomes almost impossible. By the time the Geneva trip ended, the atmosphere surrounding Meghan Markle had shifted into something almost eerie. The speech intended to position her as a respected advocate instead triggered another avalanche of criticism about hypocrisy, branding, and manufactured relevance. The bus stop woman became symbolic. The empty sidewalks became symbolic. The mirror selfie became symbolic. Every image from Geneva now carries a feeling that something bigger is quietly collapsing underneath the surface, not with one dramatic explosion, but with slow, visible erosion. And that may be the most dangerous kind of downfall because it happens publicly, piece by piece, while the cameras are still rolling. Critics now believe Geneva will be remembered as the moment the Sussex household stopped looking like misunderstood ex-royals fighting for a new future and started looking like celebrities trapped inside a shrinking spotlight, desperately trying to convince the world the crowds are still there even when the streets themselves are proving otherwise.